Welcome to Secular Soapbox. I am your host, Stacy. Tonight we have an exciting show as we discuss Enoch with our guests Derek Lambert of Mythvision podcast and Jason from Dragons and Genesis podcast. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to Skeptic Haven, and consider supporting us on Patreon. Let's start tonight's show. Hello, gentlemen.
Hello.
Hello. How is everyone doing tonight?
I'm good.
Good. It's been a while since I've seen you guys.
I know. It's
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here and for coming on and talking about this very exciting topic that we couldn't stop talking about before the show, Enoch. So, yes.
Yes, Enoch.
Enoch.
Jason, how do you want to begin this enigma?
I guess we could start at the beginning. So, in the beginning, everything was dark and formless and void.
Oh
wait,
my
maybe
God.
maybe that's too far back.
It's a different book, I believe.
No, actually,
Yeah.
Enoch shows up in Genesis.
Yeah.
So this is he's like one of the few places we have him show up in Hebrews later in the New Testament.
Mhm.
Okay.
What intrigues, and Jason, he's the one, let me just say up front, who inspired me publicly. I need people to know. When I first started Mythvision, Jason and me have an overlapping interest in mythology, like without a doubt. In fact, that's why dragons in Genesis. Think about the name.
Okay. Yeah.
He's talking about Leviathan, and he's talking about the creation myth of the chaotic dragon that Yahweh has to destroy, like Marduk did Tiamat and things like that. And he's the one who got me interested in Enoch to begin with.
That is
But-
really cool.
Yeah, but Enoch pops up, and Jason and me know, like, he lived 365 years, and that's historical. Don't you doubt it. And
Yeah.
he walked with God and then was not, for he was taken. Like, it's a, well, then what the hell happened to Enoch?
Yeah.
And just like we would like to know the question, many ancient Judeans also wanted to know that answer, and they created mythologies. Or I would even say it's potentially the fact that Enoch even appears in Genesis is already a mythological template. And we'll get into some of that stuff. But Jason, take this wherever you want to go, because we can rabbit trail and go in all sorts of areas.
Yeah. So what Derek said just now about how Enoch lived 365 years and then he walked with God is all that the Old Testament says about Enoch. Like, that's it. It's a sentence in Genesis when they're going from Seth to Noah. You know, and they're like, okay, and so begat so-and-so, they lived this many years, and when they were this old, they had this child who lived this many so-and-so. And then Enoch, he lives 365 years, and then, unlike all the others, he doesn't die. He just walks off up into heaven with God. And it's like, whoa, wait, what? There's more to this. Where is it? And you're not going to, like, if you look in the Bible and you read about it, you're not going to find it. And if you read, some of the later Jewish writings, you're going to find some stuff where it's like, oh, the reason that he only lived 365 years when everyone else was like living, 800 and 900, and then he was taken up into heaven, is because Enoch was so evil, Yahweh had to remove him from the earth. And it's like,
Oh my gosh.
whoa, hang on. That makes no sense. Why didn't he kill him? Why did he let him live that long? Why did he go up into heaven instead of
so
being
evil.
like thrown down into Sheol where he belonged? Like, what? And the reason is because certain groups of Jews saw Enoch as basically their Moses. And that's a whole topic we'll get into in a little bit. But these other Jews, we're talking Jews that were not in the Jerusalem temple. They had different scriptures than the ones who were in the temple. And among these was this fascinating book called First Enoch. When it was discovered by Westerners in, I believe, 1769 by a guy who was trying to get to the headwaters of the Nile. He was trekking across Ethiopia instead of going, paddling up the Nile from Egypt. He decides to take a shortcut across land. He's going across Ethiopia because it's a lot greener, it's more hospitable. And he finds something really bizarre. The country is full of Christians. Now, the space between him and, the mouth of the Nile at this point is mostly Muslim. No one knew that there were any Christians in Ethiopia. Mm-hmm. And he's like, how'd these guys get here? The nearest Christians they knew about had been Christians in ancient times up in Egypt, like 1,500 miles away. And all of a sudden, he's surrounded by Christians. They have their own Bibles. They've got their own churches. And their Bibles have books that he's never heard of. And so this guy, James Bruce, he was this Scotsman. He buys some Bibles from them. And he gets some of his people to make copies of them. And these things get mailed back to London. Sometime later, nearly 100 years later, a guy named, I think it was Robert Henry Charles, did the first translation. I think it was somewhere around there. Anyway, Enoch gets translated into English, and people immediately were kind of skeptical, and some even accused Bruce of forging the whole thing.
Okay.
And then in the late 1800s, people basically doing some grave robbing in Egypt in an ancient Christian grave found fragments of Enoch and realized, oh, this was an ancient book. So 1,500 miles away, there's another, not a full copy, but fragments of this thing. And then in 1952, excavations at Qumran, these are the Dead Sea Scrolls, in one of the caves, they start finding fragments of Enoch. And then they start finding more and more. And they realize that the Qumran community, they didn't have a copy of Enoch. They had a bunch. In fact, I think only Isaiah had more copies at Qumran than Enoch did. It was the second most common book in their community. They had a ton of them.
Wow.
And so at this point, they're like, okay, yeah, this was not this was not a forgery by any Westerner. We've got copies dating back over 2,000 years. Second, this was not Christian writing. This goes back to centuries before Christianity. And this is contemporary with the book of Daniel. And that's when things really took off and people started to study it in the latter half of the 20th century. And while studying these things and studying other writings at Qumran, they realized that Judaism was very different once you got outside of the temple, outside the city of Jerusalem. There were dozens of different sects of Judaism, and many of them liked this book of Enoch, and many of them were critical of the Second Temple and the people that ran it, and even of Moses. And in some ways, they were even critical of the Torah and viewed it as corrupt. And these views are expressed in the book of Enoch, which makes it really fascinating because you have some Jews pointing at some of the foundational scripture and saying like, oh yeah, that got corrupted by fallen angels. And that's some really cool stuff. And so that gives you some background about like how we found Enoch, but not so much about what it is or who this character was, other than a guy who lived like 365 years and then flew into heaven.
I guess I could go backwards with some history and work to where Enoch emerges in history.
Yeah.
Because the first thing that I think I love the way you kind of painted this and brought it from contemporary times backwards, or really from the time in which I would say the movement is to where we are. But to go before that, the documentaries I've been doing lately, are trying to go back to the oldest possible influence, or what myths influenced the origin of Enoch, even in Genesis. Because when he shows up in Genesis, it's not like there's a strange passage that doesn't give us some weird context to kind of roll with. Like, the guy lives 365 years, and Jason will go over calendar stuff here in a bit, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's interesting, the 365 and then 365. Yeah, in our calendar.
Like, it is the solar, which
Right.
is clearly a solar calendar. Numerically, it's solar, and it's not lunar. This is an important aspect to what makes Enochian Judaism separate from the Temple Judaism, or what some might refer to as Zadokite, or some might refer to as various forms that eventually become Pharisees and such over time.
Okay.
But there's several sects of Judaism, but the 365 stands out, and the fact there's other interesting things genealogically, which I saw your mom in the chat.
Oh, yes, she did. Hi.
Asked an interesting thing, like, is there any mention of Enoch's genealogy or specific relationships that stand out in Enoch's lineage? In the outset in Genesis, if you're looking at it, he's seventh from Adam, which is an important number to pay attention to, especially when we look at earlier mythologies like Etana, or like this guy named Adapa.
Yeah.
And so I don't know how much we want to get into the weeds here, but I'm looking at my script that I helped craft using Seth L. Sanders' work to try and give us a mythical antecedent to the Enoch character. And it goes all the way back to the earliest divine kingship myths in Sumeria, like the ancient Mesopotamian myths of Etana. This is the first figure, Etana, the first figure in written history to ascend from the earth to heaven.
Right.
And he's searching for, the whole myth circles around a guy who's looking for lineage. He wants to have a genealogy. Literally, like Dee's asking, like, what's the genealogy of Enoch? Well, this guy can't, his wife is barren. She isn't able to have children. So they're looking for a plant. It's ironic that it always ends up being a plant in a garden and a snake. Like, what the heck's going on with these myths?
Similarities.
Yeah. So he's looking for this plant, and he bumps into this scenario where there's an eagle and a snake, like, fighting it out. The eagle promises the snake, like, look, dude, I'm not going to mess with you. And he ends up betraying him. And then the snake ends up capturing the eagle, and the eagle's screwed and cries out for help. Then Etana comes in and rescues the day and says, hey, like, eagle says, I'll do what you need. Well, I need to get up there. So he flies on the back of an eagle up to heaven, gets this plant, and of course his lineage continues. His wife's able to have a child. It's reminds me of, like, Rachel in the Bible.
Yeah.
Specifically Rachel, not just all the other barren women that are described, but specifically Rachel, who needs to have offspring with Jacob. And he has all this offspring with her sister Leah, and they have all the slave women that are having babies, and he's popping out all these kids, but the love of his life, Rachel, can't have a child. And she takes a mandrake root, which is, it's an aphrodisiac magical plant in antiquity that would get women pregnant. And wouldn't you know it, she ends up being able to have a kid. Abracadabra. So anyway, that's just an offshoot. But Etana was very popular at first, started to wane. The whole popularity of Etana just didn't catch fire, even though it's mentioned later by certain scribes in the tradition. A new character named Adapa, who we're talking like as far away as we are from Christianity, like 2,000 years.
Yeah.
Imagine 2,000 years before Christianity. So we're talking 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. These myths are coming up in Babylon, like the oldest written history. This is even happening before Egypt's myths, and that's extremely ancient. Adapa pops up. His patron deity is Ea or Enki, depending on whether we're dealing with what source and what period of time. But his patron deity, he's out there fishing, and he ends up, while catching fish for his god, the wind comes and blows it over. And we hear about the Adapa and the south wind. The wind blows it over, and it sounds like in the language, according to people who can read this stuff, that he seems to be drowning or drowned. Don't know exactly what happens, but he's pissed. So he casts a magical spell on the south wind and breaks the wind's wings. Whatever that means, the wind stops blowing and agriculture ceases. And in fact, this creates chaos and disorder, which is the whole point about the divine wanting to hold back the chaos monster, to keep this chaotic creature at bay and to keep order in the universe. This ties into the calendar stuff that Jason's going to cover. And this goes way back. This continuation of this idea of calendar, agricultural, the seasons continuing and things going right. Well, Anu ain't having it. Anu, the high god, says, who did this?
Yeah.
And of course, he asks to summon the man who did. And of course, this is Adapa. Before he goes up, Ea says, hey, they're going to offer you food and drink of death. It's poison. Don't eat it. Don't drink it. But when they offer you the oil, put the oil of anointment on and the robe. Put the robe on, but don't eat food or drink the water. It'll kill you. He gets up there, passes Demuzid and I think it's Inanna, but two of these gatekeepers in heaven are like, hey, what's up? What are you doing here? I'm like, hey, I'm here to see the guy. He told me what's up. I got to come up here and explain myself, what I did, how the wind came. So he goes before
He's
Anu.
quoting directly. That's exactly how he said it. You know, he had a New Jersey accent too.
Jersey accent, the whole nine. He goes up there and Anu's like, hey, check it out. Would you like to feast with the food of life and the drink of immortality?
Oh my gosh.
And he's like, nice try, Anu. No thanks. I'll take the robe and the oil there, though. And of course, he puts the oil on in the robe. But Anu goes, what has Ea done? Why has Ea tricked you? This was really the food and drink of immortality, and you just said no to it? What is Ea up to? And of course, if you know this clever character, Enki or Ea, in Mesopotamian myth, it's like the Prometheus character. Cool with the gods, and then goes around with the humans and goes, hey, I'm on your team too. Like, all the gods don't really, they're indifferent about humans. This god plays the role of both in a weird way. Like Prometheus steals fire from Zeus, from heaven, from Mount Olympus, and gives it to humanity, but plays like he's cool with the gods and then turns around and helps the humans. And so this is kind of, I think, where Prometheus myth comes from. They're also borrowing from the earlier myths in Mesopotamia, because flood myths didn't show up. They came from the East in the Greek mythologies. And you can go far enough back and you'll realize they don't have flood myths in their Greek mythology, and then it shows up. So that's getting off track. But I'm leading up to point out that the kings would use this myth and identify as the wise Adapa. One note on that mythology before I leave is this. Adapa, just like Utnapishtim, would not have been allowed around mortals. If he would have been granted immortality, the gods would have been forced to separate this person because they had become divine from the rest of humanity. That's why Gilgamesh has to go way out in the middle of nowhere, far, far away from humanity, just to find this guy, Utnapishtim and his wife, who survived the flood. And so the same thing would have happened. And Ea, according to Assyriologists like Joshua Bowen, even Kip Davis, who was here hanging out with us, they're all thinking maybe the reason Ea tricked him is that Ea knew that he would get the insights of the divine, the knowledge of the gods, but yet come back to humanity.
Right.
And then teach those arts and those godly truths like agriculture, warfare, this, that, how to tell the stars and the sun and calendars and calculations and all that. He's teaching humanity these things. And the earliest Sumerian kings lists incorporate Adapa and Etana into it. So now the divine rights and knowledge that comes from the gods, calculations, agriculture, you name it, are a God-given thing, or gods given, because it's plural, it's polytheistic, to the king. And the king identifies with Adapa. I am Adapa, many of the texts say. You find this in exorcism texts. You find this in regular receipts. You find this in their mythologies. It's prevalent. And this goes on and on. To make a long story short, this goes on and on from the old Babylonian to Neo-Babylonian, Neo-Assyrian periods, all the way into the time where the Bible's talking about these prophets that are coming in and they're condemning Jerusalem, or they're condemning the Judeans, or they're condemning Israel, and the Assyrians' conquest comes in and rocks Israel to the ground. Then Babylonian conquest, which, by the way, Assyrians and Babylonians are using these mythologies in their teaching. So the Judeans that are in captivity, they're learning this stuff because they had a common tongue of Aramaic. They translated many of these Akkadian, Babylonian myths into a common tongue of Aramaic. This is how the Judeans learned about these mythologies, and then were able to write about them, giving their own versions. So they're using these earlier myths, incorporating them, and then you have a time, Persia, they rebuild the temple. You have these Zadokites who claim to be first temple priest. They claim to have the true scepter to being the priest of the temple and such. And you find this constant struggle within the Jewish communities where there's a chosen group within a chosen group, and these are them, the Enochians. And they're the ones who have the true knowledge of the divine, that, Enoch, who goes to heaven and brings back the true knowledge, giving them the revelation so that they have the truth, over against potentially, as Dr. Boccaccini, the scholar who's talking about the two different competing Torahs, potentially the Moses version is competing against this Enochian version. And Jason, I've talked enough, but can you compare? Give us some.
It's so fascinating. Like, wow.
Yeah.
There's a lot.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, and I just want to remind people that you did come out with a documentary that goes so in depth into all of this yesterday. So everyone go over to Mythvision and check that out. So
Yeah, I think Derek has 2 long videos that are all about Enoch. I think you have a third one just about the Watchers. And then I have a 7-part mini-series on my podcast. I believe it's episodes 48 to 54. So total of about 5 hours of content just explaining this book. And even all of that combined is still only just scratching the surface, because it doesn't even dive into like the deep comparisons and stuff, which we can still touch on here. So one thing
just to phrase the question, because Stacy, this is stuff we talked to Stacy before, and Stacy's like, I'm not sure I'll know what questions always to ask here. But I'm asking, with Stacy is the mediator, and this is
I'm just listening to.
I know, right? Suppose someone doesn't even understand, how would Moses compare to Enoch? What do they have in common? That's a good starting point.
Yeah. So,
Can you explain what they have in common?
Good question.
Sure. How many hours do you have? No. So. There's a lot in common with that. Now, one thing I want to touch on, like super briefly, to finish answering that first question about the genealogy and how he's related. So, Enoch's son, at least his most prominent and famous son, is Methuselah, the longest living person in the Bible. Oh, Methuselah gave birth to Lamech. Lamech didn't give birth to, but he fathered Lamech. Lamech fathered Noah. Okay, so that's how you get from Seth over to Noah. It's through the line of Enoch. Now, that is a whole thing. Derek talked about how these figures who became divine were then separated from humanity, so they couldn't, continue interacting with them and bringing, this heavenly knowledge and everything else. Enoch does the same thing. After he becomes this celestial figure, he then lives outside of the firmament. And there's this story in, I believe, chapter 106 of First Enoch, where Lamech is kind of freaked out because his baby is born and he's kind of glowing and can walk around and talk like within seconds of being born. And he's like, I'm pretty sure my wife screwed an angel. And like that's his concern. And he knows, about this because earlier in the book, beginning with like chapter 6 onward, angels having sex with humans created a race of giants called the Nephilim that were a kilometer in height and drank people's blood and were destroying the entire world, okay? And so this is going on at the time that Lamech's baby is born, and he's kind of freaked. And he's like, I gotta find out what's going on. So he goes to visit Methuselah, and he's like, can you help me out here? And Methuselah's like, I got you, fam. I know who's got the answers. The one with the divine knowledge. He's seen the tablets of destiny. He's seen the entire universe. Uriel took him around for a grand tour. He knows everything. Let me talk to Pops. And so he prays to Enoch. Yeah, he said that. Enoch comes down. He comes through the firmament and he pops up and he's like, all right, look. And he's like, Enoch is now no longer human. He's lived his 365 years. He's walked with God. His flesh melted off. He is now like an angel. He comes in. He's all glowing and everything else. He's pretty frightening to behold. And he talks to Lamech. He's like, oh, no. Look, dude. I know you suspect your wife of getting into some hinky stuff, but it's okay. This child was sent by God. He has a divine purpose. I'm going to tell you what to name him. His name is going to reference his divine purpose. This whole thing is ordained by God. It has to do with the remission of sin, the cleansing of corruption off the face of the earth. Stop me when this starts to sound too much like the opening chapter of Matthew. Right. And after that, he goes back. He names him Noah as was commanded by Enoch. Noah goes on. He does the whole ark thing. The earth is cleansed. There's this everlasting covenant that's established, yada, yada, yada. That's how Enoch ties into the biblical story. He's the one responsible for all of this stuff. He's the one you talk to. He's this intermediary. He goes between heaven and earth. Now, how does he fit with Moses? So let's say you're pushed out of the temple. You're living out in the desert. You're in this dusty old community somewhere. The nearest source of water is too salty to drink. And everything is just miserable. To justify it, you pretend that being poor and miserable and starving and eating locust is a good thing, because you know that you're never going to get rid of your fleas. Meanwhile, these Zadokites who now run this temple that's bigger than ever, they're getting fat, they're wearing fine robes, everything else. And they claim that their source of legitimacy can be traced back to some dude with an Egyptian name who led people out of bondage and took them to the promised land. Okay, why don't we try a little one-upmanship? Your guy, your lineage came from Moses. Okay, yeah, cool. Our priesthood goes all the way back to the 7th generation from Adam. Oh, your dude ascended on a mountain to get his law code and his scripture. Yeah, mine went to heaven. And then he went again later. And, your guy died before he went to the promised land. Yeah, mine just walked up to heaven. Like, he never died. Okay. Your dude came off a mountain with a glowing face. Yeah, mine turned into an angel. Like the whole person turned into an angel. Okay. You have scriptures that this dude wrote down? Yeah, those have been corrupted by the angels that caused the flood. We got the true one that was delivered by Uriel himself. Your scripture was stored in the Ark of the Covenant. Ours wrote on Noah's Ark. Literally everything that Moses does, Enoch does better. Wow. And so all of these different things, they're like, yeah, so you've got this cool claim to fame and you got your fancy temple and all that. By the way, having a huge, fancy, rich temple, that's a sign that you're dealing with fallen angels. the good ones would be poor and miserable. And then they have this whole big list of things that look very similar to Beatitudes that say exactly that. So that those are some of the ways that Enoch is like Moses. He's basically better than Moses. He's if Moses leveled up a few dozen times, then he would be approaching Enoch.
So is there was like a competition almost between them, and this was both written down at the same time? Like
not at the same time.
Okay.
It looks like a lot of the works, like from the Torah and stuff, some of them were beginning prior to the Babylonian exile, and then it really started to come together during and in the generations immediately following the exile.
Okay.
So we're talking 500s or so.
Yeah.
And the Enoch stuff's in the 200-300s. So we're centuries later.
Right.
Okay.
So these reforms in Judaism have occurred. A lot of people are unhappy with it. If you read the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, it talks all about that, but it's written from the point of view of these reformers. Your whole Bible is, from that. The people that are basically cast out, these are the people that are bringing us stuff like Enoch. So their descendants, generations later, they're like, oh, we've got a better one.
Okay.
And yours is from evil fallen angels. And so that's where Enoch is coming from. It's coming from basically denominational opponents of the Jewish temple. So you could think of it like the Jewish temple is the Roman Catholic Church, and then you got a bunch of Lutherans who are like, the Pope sucks. It's sort of like that.
Okay.
That could be a way of understanding it in more familiar
in our
terms.
context. Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. So I'm wondering, to kind of, because the only thing I really know, or not the only thing, but what I do know a lot about Enoch is a lot of conspiracy type theories have come from the book of Enoch. That's the most familiar thing that I have to go on. And like you mentioned the Nephilim. So that's the most familiar I am with it.
Well, that's Bigfoot.
A little bit about Bigfoot. Yeah.
yeah. No, they get into that. So the Nephilim were basically just giants. They were like humans, only really big and kind of monstrous.
Is there any archaeological evidence for them at all? No. Okay, I didn't think so, but I just wanted to.
Now, these things in the Bible, when you encounter the Nephilim, like Goliath is one of them. And in the oldest copies of the text, he's about 6.5 feet tall. So I literally have friends taller than Goliath. Okay,
I dated someone taller than Goliath.
Yeah. Now, at a time when most people were like 5 foot nothing, that's freaking huge. Yeah. It's not out of the realm of possibility. We have skeletons of people who were over 6 feet tall from this time period. It has to do with mainly just diet. So yeah, you could get that. It's not unreasonable. And we're also talking about, like the same book literally says that there are people with 6 fingers and 6 toes, like on each hand. So, they're kind of exaggerating and making some stuff up too. Cool, whatever. But in Enoch, the Nephilim are not 6'9". Okay. They're like a kilometer in height. They're huge. And for the Americans, I once did the conversion in one of the episodes. I measured it in Coke machines, because we don't like metric.
We do kilometers, so that makes sense to me.
Yeah. I did it in kilometers and Coke machines for, the metric people and the people in the States. But so these things are gigantic. They're a mile tall. They start eating up all the food. And then when they run out of food, they start eating people. That's a big no-no.
People are actually the way it's described right there in the Book of Watchers. And just to be very frank, the reason this is even a popular book, in my opinion, isn't the endless celestial journeys about the angels and showing like the different areas of things. It's more this, and these giants, these Nephilim, they were eating humans and drinking the blood and like all this crazy vampire-ish sci-fi stuff. That's what really makes this book, I think, so interesting. In fact, Genesis, it's arguably the most interesting area is the flood. This region here. Now you can get into the Abraham story. You can like some of the interesting stuff about that and be like, oh, that's a crazy story too. He's about to sacrifice his only son, was his favorite. It wasn't his only son, but anyway, that's a different thing. But the humans are actually making sacrifices. Like a sacrifice is food for the gods. So the humans are working to get them food, making altars to try and get them the food. And they run out, like he's saying. And now they're like, well, we need to eat. Now they're eating the humans, according to this book. And God is like, not happy.
The Nephilim, they start drinking each other's blood. And and he's right. Most people, they stop studying Enoch after chapter 36 because the first 36 chapters is the Book of Watchers. And it's like everything was created. It was nice and orderly. Oh, there's a bunch of angels having sex with humans. Mm-hmm. Now the giants, the slaughter, the vampires, kill them all. All right, I'm going to take you around a brief tour of the stars, the end. And done. And that's pretty much the Book of Watchers. So you don't need to listen to those episodes. It's done. No. So it's like, it's really exciting stuff. And one of the things I told Derek way back in the day, the first time we talked was, I study the Bible looking for the mythology, but the Bible, they were getting rid of mythology. That's why the Bible is there. They're creating this history to sort of bring these people together. They're not trying to write mythology. There's mythology in it, but they're not trying to write mythology.
Okay.
Enoch is where the mythology is.
Yeah.
This is where like the Jews had some fantastic mythology, but you'd never know it from reading the Bible. It's all begats, and these people hated these people, and kill all those, and it's all your fault. No, here we've got these divine beings coming down. They make this pact. They come together. They're led by this guy named Semyaza. And he's like, hey, you know what? I want to make this pact. We're going to do something that is prohibited. And he gathers up a whole bunch of these other angels, and they all come together, and they basically form this bond. And then they're like, okay, we're gonna go down, and we're gonna land on this one particular mountain, and then from there we're gonna spread out over the earth, and we're gonna find all these different women, and we're gonna take them as wives, and then that's gonna be our thing. And they do this. This is the beginning of chapter 6 of First Enoch, and they come down and they do this, and this creates this race of giants and the division, because the Jews, they liked everything to be nice and neat and tidy. Each thing that's created is done on its own day. The heavens and the earth are separated, and the firmament stands between them as this barrier, and you don't breach that. And that's the sin of the angels. It wasn't having sex. They didn't care about that. It was breaching this boundary between heaven and earth, because, before this boundary was erected, everything was chaotic and tumultuous and dangerous. The first thing that Yahweh does is he separates it. And that's what the creation story of Genesis 1 is separating everything and arranging it, making it orderly, to take chaos and turn it into order so you can have life. And the first 5 chapters of Enoch is all about how everything was created and it was orderly. Everything had its time and its place, and nothing broke its boundaries. And then some angels decided to do exactly that. And the response to that, God is like, okay, you wanted to bring heaven down to earth? I'm going to do that. I'm going to take this ocean that I put up here above the firmament and drop the entire thing on you and kill everything. And so now the 6 days of creation have been undone. You're back to the time when everything is formless and it's just covered in ocean. And then he can start over and he can raise up the dry land, And then you can get your animals and your birds and all that coming out of the ark, and then your people can come out. And okay, now we can start over. And of course, people, they look at this really exciting stuff and they're like, oh man, these monstrous humanoids. I wonder if that's what Bigfoot is.
Right.
Not realizing that there's a very direct correlation to the presence of bears in an area and Bigfoot sightings. And when people see Bigfoot near a barbed wire fence and they go there and they collect the hair and they send it off to a lab to get tested, over 50% of those hairs that have been DNA tested turned out to belong to bears. It's probably not angel babies. It's probably just big mammals.
Another interesting point to emphasize something we might ask morally is we go, hold on, we've done this several times. God kills everything, animals included, not just baby humans, which we like to go, that's the worst, right? Infanticide, all this stuff. Yeah. And we go, how dare he do that? Even the Jews, this is an interesting point to bring up. In antiquity, all the way through the history of the Talmud, the Mishnah, the various writings debating each other and arguing along the way, they struggled with these ancient texts and had to find ways to make loopholes of the morality or how to get out of it. And I think Enoch, especially the Book of Watchers, when you see how vivid the image is drawn about what the angels did and how far it goes to elaborate about them drinking the blood and taking all of the humans that God made and then making giants and then growing attached to these children that become giants that are now cannibalizing all life on earth. First animals, because now there's no animals to eat. Now humans. It really goes out of its way, I feel like, by the author to really get God off the hook. Like, hey, look, I know this flood story just sounds like God did a really bad thing here. And the Genesis account kind of just emphasizes man's heart was desperately wicked or continually wicked. So it says it was wicked after the flood. So God's pretty bad looking here. No. You haven't read Enoch, my friend. Once you read Enoch, you'll have a different change of heart. God did a favor, actually.
Right.
But what I find interesting in just one more comment here, Jason, and you'll remember this because we always have to reread. There's so many layers to this. Is that these angels, these fallen ones that are really deities that are called angels, they're like part of the host of heaven. They're the host of heaven that we hear about in earlier texts that hint at like a variety of deities, not just one. They all beg for forgiveness. Enoch is the mediator, and they say, please tell the Holy One of heaven that we are sorry, to show us mercy, please. And this God is not about to show any mercy at all, does not budge, gives them a condemnation, sticks to his guns. And then, of course, they're not flooded because they wouldn't die in it. They're divine ones. They have to then be put into a different place where we would call hell or lake of fire or these damnation places, but it describes them as mountains. So while it gives us like celestial tour, kind of like the book of Revelation where John's like going on this like tour, it tells you like, oh, that's where the fallen ones are now, and they are suffering. And this is where those who follow wicked ways and such will go. And then he shows that the tree of knowledge, wisdom, the tree of wisdom that is seen. And it gives you like one glimpse of that. And then you're right there toward the end of the book, as far as I can remember.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
That is
kind of interesting. It
is
again, I said before the stream, we're dealing with a Star Wars-like thing where when I first heard about Star Wars, I was a full-grown adult. I have a weird childhood. My parents never watched Star Wars. We're not into it. Never watched it. So you may curse me for that, and I get it. That's totally acceptable. But as I got older,
it either. You've seen it since then? Yeah.
Do what?
You've seen Star Wars since you were a kid?
I've watched some Star Wars since a kid. I've been watching the Mandalorian shows and all the cool fun. It's cool. I love Baby Yoda, which is not Yoda.
I love Baby Yoda.
So
yes. Okay. Anyways.
So the point is, notice all those shows. Like here you have, again, you have the original Star Wars,
Mm-hmm.
Those 6 movies over 20 years that end up coming out. Then you have this Mandalorian show with a descendant of the same race of being that comes from Yoda, right? Like Yoda's great-great-great-grandfather is probably this, or great-grandfather is this little Yoda's ancestor.
Right.
There is mythology into mythology when you get into Enoch, and you are lost into it. And what's interesting also is the theology, just like the New Testament, is not always cohesive. It's not just deterministic, because in Second Temple Judaism, when I say deterministic, I mean predestination. God made sure he had the numbers set out. He had the stars aligned. He had down to the second how many heads are chosen, who's going to get destroyed, who's going to be accepted. And then there's some texts, like in the Damascus document, that aren't deterministic. They say the angels freely chose to go and find daughters and of men and have kids. And then other texts seem to say, no, this was all planned. Like God had it all determined. No wonder Calvinists and Arminians will never get along.
Right?
Not only is this in non-canonical materials, this is period biblical. Like you're going to get everything under the sun in this material. Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. Something to add to all of that. So as far as like the violence goes, it literally says that there was so much bloodshed on earth that the blood itself in the ground was crying out for justice, and its cries reached all the way to the highest level of heaven. At this time, they believed there was like 7 different layers of heaven. It was like layers like an onion, and the uppermost layer was where the great high God sat. And so these voices from the blood of all the thousands or millions of victims is reaching all the way up to there, and these archangels go and like tell them, hey, I know you haven't been paying attention to Earth, but there's some stuff going on. Now, there's like 3 different origin stories for evil in the first book, the first section of First Enoch, the Book of Watchers.
Wow, okay.
You have the Semyaza, who makes this pact, and he takes like a third of the angels down to earth, and they go and they start all this trouble. They have sex with human women. They make the Nephilim. But there's another version of the story in which this other angel named Azazel, he comes down. And he brings forbidden knowledge. And he and all these other angels, they teach people all of these heinous things, like how to read signs in the thunder, an art called brontomancy. They teach them how to forge iron and make weapons. They teach them warfare. The worst one of all is they teach them cosmetics. And
I was just about to say,
like
you're wearing makeup, and that is a no.
Specifically eye makeup. They beautify the eyes.
I love doing that.
Whoa, that's some. What shade is that? Azazel's allure. And so they do this, and then so it's a sort of Prometheus story. It's divine knowledge being delivered to mortals. And then there's a third one.
May I comment just to make the point? What Jason just said, while there's 2 in there, I was looking up some of the research, and a lot of the scholars think these are 2 contradictory traditions that get fused into this book. So you know how we talk about Genesis 1 and 2 contradicting? Mm-hmm. They're already doing this in not only Genesis, they're doing it in Enoch. And in that same book of the Book of the Watchers, which is the first part of what we call the 5-part series of 1 Enoch, in there, you got the blood-sucking giants eating all of humanity, which is like, God's got to wipe them out. Duh, God's good. Yeah. And then also why humans are also guilty. These humans are doing these arts that they're not allowed to do.
They're wearing mascara. I mean, you got to kill them for that. And now there's actually a third, and I believe older, tradition in First Enoch concerning the origin of evil. I think this is actually the original one that was in the book. And that is the 7 rebellious angels. And there were these 7 angels. They're never named. But what happens is these angels, and you learn this from the first 5 chapters, angels, like, they move stars around the sky, the sun, the moon, the winds, all this stuff. They move all the stuff around. They keep it all orderly, okay? And all this is done according to this covenant that governs the universe. It's like the code in the Matrix. And angels, they move the stars around. And there are these 7 angels, and they move a constellation of stars into the sky at the wrong time. And they're doing this in an attempt to usurp the power of God. They're trying to take over the throne. What they're doing is they're trying to elevate themselves to the highest point and overthrow God. And they want to take over. And because of their treachery, these 7 angels are cast down, and they come streaking down like balls of fire. And they're huge. It says that they're like flaming mountains, and they crash into the desert. And that's where they stay. Now, the reason I say that I think this is the original origin of evil story in the book of Enoch is because of this experiment that I did. I went through not just the book of Watchers, the first 36 chapters, but the entire book of Enoch. And what I did was every time there was a story that was a reference to Semyaza or Azazel, those 2 stories, I removed them. I removed every section of First Enoch that was a reference to those 2 origin stories of evil. And I kept all the stuff that was related to the rebellious angel falling mountain stories. And what I found is that if you print out a copy of First Enoch, which is that thick, the amount that is removed if you take out the stories of Semyaza and Azazel is only about that.
Oh my gosh.
The 2 most popular stories in First Enoch have almost 0 impact on the book at all. And if you remove them, the entire narrative actually flows better. The thing goes from how everything is nice and orderly and all the angels are behaving straight to the 7 angels do something at the wrong time, and it causes all of this evil. And then you go through the entire book just reading about that. And there's only a few spots in the whole thing where there's any mention. And when there's a mention of Semyaza or Azazel or their crimes, it looks like a clumsy insertion that interrupts the text. And if you remove it, that section always flows better. And once you get out of the Book of Watchers, there's only a handful of those mentions in there. Right. And it's only just like a couple sentences, and that's it.
Well, let's give a little background here, because this is an important point that you made me just now during this stream connect some dots that I'm sure you've already done. And that is these 2 figures that you're talking about. Azazel is the one I'm mostly familiar with. And for someone like Stacey who's like, well, Azazel has a what? Is it a bread you're baking? Like, what is this?
If you haven't read it, then you're not totally sure who these
Leviticus 16?
Yeah.
Azazel is this desert demon god, or it's a desert dwelling deity.
Oh my gosh.
That when we hear about the scapegoat mythology, that Jews would take 2 goats. I think it was 2, right? Wasn't it 2, Jason?
It was 2 goats meant to be identical.
Right. Look, the goats just dropped the balloons on your screen.
I don't know how that happens on some people's boxes, but go
Those
on.
are the angels in the lower mountain beneath Jason. So the goat concept where they sacrifice, or they laid their sins, pretty much. The priest would lay the sins of Israel upon this poor little goat with a red thread on it, send that joker out into the desert. Why? He's giving the offering to the god Azazel, out into the wilderness. Yahweh himself is not taking this offering. It's another deity that is taking the offerings of their sins, and this is where he dwells. So what I find interesting, based on what you said about them falling from heaven and in the desert, makes me think like this is a way of building upon that existing motif, that there has to be something lifeless, like a dark or not good creature that dwells in this area, making this geography inhabitable, uninhabitable, I mean. And so it kind of ties into this whole scapegoat motif, right, and the demons or the fallen ones.
Yeah. What's interesting is according to the Hebrew Bible, there are only two deities you are allowed to make sacrifice to, Yahweh and the demon Azazel. They outline it in Leviticus 16. You're
Wait, what?
Every year on the Day of Atonement, the high priest, he takes two identical goats. He brings them into the temple. And then what he does is he takes one goat who is meant to represent Yahweh. The phrasing in there means like basically for Yahweh, but the terminology can also mean as Yahweh. This goat is a stand-in for God. He's butchered. His blood is splashed all around the sanctuary, all over the four horns that are on the altar. The whole thing's dripping with blood. He throws it all over the place. And then he takes his bloody hand and he walks over to the second goat that represents Azazel, and he places his hand on the forehead of the goat. What this is, they're taking the blood of this sacrificed God, of the dead Yahweh who's just been butchered. His redeeming blood splashes all over the temple, which is meant to represent the world, the universe. This now gathers up all of the sin in the world. The high priest then takes that sin, represented by the blood, and places it on the goat that now is a stand-in for Azazel. He is then led out into the desert and thrown off a cliff into a pit, which is where Azazel is supposed to be. And so what this does, this symbolically, through this sympathetic magic, gathers up all of the wickedness and corruption in the universe into one place in this goat and throws it into this pit to where Azazel, the root of all evil, dwells. Basically, you're taking creation and you're purifying it through blood magic and putting all of the evil that has been accumulated throughout the year, and you're putting it back where it belongs, in this pit in the desert where the god of evil is imprisoned. He was imprisoned, I believe, by Michael the Archangel, but it could have been a different angel. Each angel went and got a different dude and locked him into a different pit. I think it was Michael that got Azazel, but I could be wrong. But that's the Day of Atonement ritual. And if you don't do that on a very specific day of the year, and you don't do it properly, then eventually the evil will begin to accumulate year after year, and it'll get worse and worse. And according to the third section of First Enoch, the book of astronomy, it will cause the end of the world.
Oh my God.
And
not with water this time. With
fire. Okay. Now, of course, this whole ritual sounds a lot like the crucifixion, where you have two criminals, Jesus, son of the Father, and Jesus,
I don't know what's going on.
Jesus Barabbas, which early copies of the Gospels actually say that Barabbas' name was Jesus, and Barabbas means son of the Father. So you have two people, both named Jesus, son of the Father.
What is happening?
I don't know.
What are you doing?
It is not me or him. Or did you say Jason?
So
you
have these two guys, both named Jesus, son of the Father, who are brought in. One is a stand-in for Yahweh. The other is meant to be evil. The good one, the innocent one, is crucified and his blood goes everywhere. The evil one is released and goes out into the desert. So the Day of Atonement ritual is being played out in the gospel crucifixion story of Jesus. That's what it's supposed to be. His whole purpose is to atone for the sins of the world, to repair this breach, to set the world to right the way it's supposed to be in the opening chapters of First Enoch. And this is supposed to be done by these temple priests. The problem is, after the reforms came about, these priests were kicked out, and different priests were now running the temple. The Zadokite priests with all this Babylonian influence. And one of the major influences brought from Babylon was a lunar calendar. You don't count by the movement of the sun in the sky, which was very important to the ancient Jews. They used to be really heavy into astronomy. And The third section of First Enoch, the Book of Astronomy, spells this out. It starts off by telling you very specifically how to build a device that will allow you to know which day of the year it is just by sitting in one spot, looking over this device and watching the sun come up. And it has markings that tell you what month and what day it is. And it's very, very meticulously planned out. They have this very complex and precise solar calendar. And they use this to determine when you're supposed to do certain rituals, especially the atonement ritual that purifies the world to prevent us from ever getting to the point where we have to get flooded again. Okay? This literally has to be done annually to save the world. And this section spells it out very specifically. If you don't do this, the world will end.
But that doesn't make any sense because God promised he would never flood the
He
world
would never
again.
flood.
Oh, he would never flood it.
Not that he
They're
would
going to come in
Oh,
with
not
some...
that he would destroy
Right.
it. Okay.
They're going to come in with some
Listen,
good
we said-
old-fashioned Zoroastrian wrath here
yeah.
with fire. The
Yeah,
whole
Jason-
world will be consumed.
Just to connect the dots for people who were hearing Jason there, he mentioned earlier how the angels brought out the constellations at the wrong time. Well, think about this. How do we measure time, right? We observe the celestial, lunar, solar, the bodies of heaven in order to be able to know what time it is. This is
Right.
the point. So here you have competing sects of Judaism with different calendar systems. One believes they're accurate as above, so below. They're actually modeling themselves after the divine. Now, they might be giving them a little bit of leeway by saying, well, you guys got off on the wrong calendar because the fallen angels brought out the wrong stuff and you didn't have the insight that we do. I don't know. I don't know if they're trying to say that these angelic beings that ended up bringing out these celestial bodies at the wrong times threw off these mortals on earth that are supposed to practice these celebrations at the exact same times in order to keep order, right, in the universe, because chaos is the enemy. In fact, you go all the way to the end, that dragon, that serpent in the book of Revelation that talks about that dragon, the devil, Satan, the liar from the beginning, he's chaos. This is the chaos dragon myth that has just been anthropomorphized even further into the book of Revelation that's getting destroyed. And this goes all the way back to the times I was telling you, Atana, Adapa, Genesis creation, down to Revelation. That same dragon of chaos is still playing a role. That's why it chases the woman who is pregnant in the wilderness trying to eat her child. It's the dragon. It's trying to bring more chaotic instead of disorder. And the priest, these ones writing the Enochian literature that are claiming Enoch's the one writing them, they're the ones who got it right. They're the ones accurately keeping the calendars and the festivals and stuff at the correct time, while the other guys are wrong, which is why they also, as far as I'm aware, it's extremely apocalyptic. They're thinking the end is going to happen soon. And they're doing all these measurements from like Ezekiel's 390 years from the time of the Babylonian exile, or Daniel's 490 years. And the Habakkuk Pesher does that. They're trying to calculate numbers 490 years from this period to our day. Mind you, this is century or two before Christianity. So they're already doing date setting and wrong. Just to put it very frankly, like they are just wrong. And they make continuous claims about the end happening in our generation, just setting up the complete failure of what ends up becoming Christianity on apocalyptic thought.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, sorry. Go ahead.
And something I was going to say is, well, they're doing this. If you're like the Jews who came back from Babylon and you're using this lunar calendar, your festivals are not going to be on the right days because your calendar is 354 days long. So by the end of the first year, you're already off by a week and a half. In just a few years, you're off by a month.
Oh my gosh.
So your calendar is really screwed up, and they'd have to do this weird juggling act where they would have to like add stuff in periodically to get the thing sort of back in line, so you're not trying to plant your crops in the dead of winter. You know, like it was really a mess, and they did this for centuries. Now, these other Jews, these sectarian Jews who, weren't in control of the temple any longer, they were still trying to use this lunar calendar, or the solar calendar rather. And this calendar, it was very meticulously set up, and each season had its own archangel that presided over it. Okay, so you would have like this 90-day period, and then there'd be an additional day added into that portion, into that season. And it was a celebratory day for the archangel that ruled over that season. Now, the copies of Enoch that we have, this particular section is damaged. It's incomplete. And from what we can tell from earlier fragments, it was quite a bit longer, because these fragments contain sentences that aren't in the complete copies we have. So obviously it used to be longer, and it's abridged or corrupted. Parts of it were missing. I think one of the parts that was missing was the part that added a 5th day to the calendar to give it a full 365 days as a celebratory day for the high God who ruled over the archangels. It's the only thing that would make sense. They knew the calendar was 365 days, but their outline only has 364.
Right.
Each season gets a special day for the archangels. That gives you, you go from 360 to 364. They obviously knew there was another one. That's why Enoch lives 365 days. So it only makes sense that there was maybe like a New Year celebration that had one for El Elyon, and that was the 5th day that they added in. Now, here's the really funny part. The Day of Atonement, which was the most important celebration for them, the day in which they gather up all this blood from over the entire world to gather in all of the sin, transmit it onto this goat, throw it out. This brings all the sin and corruption back to Azazel, saves the world for another year, prevents us from being consumed by fire. When this happened, this was being celebrated in the fall. Guess what constellation appears on the eastern horizon that coincides with their calculation for the Day of Atonement? The Pleiades. 7 stars.
Oh.
The 7 angels in the very beginning that come out at the wrong time to usurp God and are cast down. I think it is symbolic of what happened when the Jews switched to a lunar calendar and they were trying to celebrate the Day of Atonement at the wrong time. The day was coming up, but it did not match the appearance of the constellations. And this was a symbol of all that was corrupt with the Second Temple. I actually go through the second half of episode 52 is an entire breakdown of basically my hypothesis about essentially the theology behind Enoch and why the solar calendar is more important than any other aspect of the book of Enoch to these people. I think that the corruption brought by the lunar calendar, causing these celebrations to occur at the wrong time of year, and the constellations to be appearing on the wrong days, is what led to their entire theology. And that section of the episode actually has like quotes from Enoch that essentially spell this out. And it's like got chapter and verse with it. And it's like, it's not even hidden. Once you read it, you realize they're not vague about it. They're flat out saying, you're using the wrong calendar. It's causing the end of the world. This is what's going to happen. You're corrupt for using a lunar calendar. And it like they very specifically state this. And I lay that out. I believe it's in episode 52.
Okay.
So yeah, it's the second half. I put a disclaimer before I get to that point saying, okay, this is my speculation.
Right.
So if you don't want to hear that, just go to the next episode. But yeah, that's what I think is going on. And that's why I think that section of Enoch and the solar calendar and the fallen angels, I think all of that is basically one big theology. And it's what was so important about them. And it's why they believed that the world was going to end according to some calculations, in the 1st century AD.
Right.
And these things were going to be accompanied by the return of this messianic figure who might be identified as the Son of Man, a title that pops up frequently in First Enoch. He would come from this offshoot of Jewish priests. He would lead a sort of almost rebellion against a corrupt temple. He would talk about tearing it down and rebuilding it. He would purify it. He would be betrayed by his own people. There's this section in there, in the latter half of Enoch, called the Animal Apocalypse, in which they retell the entire history of the world, beginning with like Adam and going all the way to the end of it. But the people are all played by animals. Like Adam is a white bull, and Eve is a heifer, which women love it when you call them heifers. Yes. And there's all these different things. So all the people are being played. Yeah, right. You get the little bell around your neck. But all these different people are being played by animals. And in it, there's this one figure who's presented as like this messianic figure. And he tries to do all these things to set everything to rights, but eventually he's betrayed and he dies. And then Enoch predicts that he's going to come back to finish his work. Now, Christians, once they found Enoch, they said, oh, look, it's talking about Jesus. Centuries before Jesus, they were predicting Jesus. It's not talking about Jesus. It's talking about this guy named Judas Maccabeus, who around like 160, 175 BCE, he led this big rebellion. He kicks out all of these guys who were left over from Alexander the Great when they took over. And they're kicking all these dudes out, the Seleucids. And part of what he did was they went in, he and also I think it was his brother, they go in and they take all of the Greek statues that are in the Jerusalem temple and they throw them out. They tear down a bunch of stuff. They rebuild it to, basically they're getting rid of a bunch of this Greek pagan influence. And the whole temple gets reconsecrated and it gets a new high priest. And people read this and they think, oh, this is about Jesus. It's like, no, it's about this guy from like 200 years earlier. But Enoch wants this to happen again and wants it to be completed this time, wants the temple fully dismantled and wants it built up right. And so it's wanting something like Jesus to happen, and it's saying that it's going to eventually, and that when this does, it's going to usher in a new age. And so you have all of these different Jewish sects that are outside of the temple who were not only sort of, anticipating something like this. They desperately want it to happen. And so you really have the kernel, the setup for Christianity, 200 plus years.
Oh my gosh.
Before. So it's like, Christianity wasn't a thing that just happened by accident. You had thousands of Jews living outside of the temple who had this in their head already.
Right.
I love
centuries earlier.
Jason, it's clear, and I know we're getting close to our hour here, Stace, in terms of the time, but I just want to say, no matter what position you take, Jason, on this, and I know that you take the mythicist one, either model these motifs, these tropes, this clearly is in the mind of Jews, period. At the origin of Christianity, the origins of Christianity, the beginning of Christianity, whatever model you pick, it doesn't matter because this is there. It is without a doubt already established. The apocalypticism, the mysticism, the non-temple, ideas that are already creeping in, which you can maybe think Zoroastrianism, combine that with a little bit of Greek ideas about Plato's philosophy and stuff creeping in, some of the Hellenism, because God's will dwell in temples made by hands, right? It would need to be a celestial, ethereal type of temple, not this man-made temple, which Paul kind of harps on, and according to the book of Acts, things like this. But I just figured, if I could, throw in us a curveball, because we went down the calendar route. the mythical stuff's like my favorite. And I wrote not this last documentary, but the one before that. I was dealing with Enoch's mythical roots. And I try to go out on a limb and not just deal with Mesopotamian. I try to get into some of the Prometheus, but I'm going to try and read as quick as I can because I think this is juicy. And you'll see an element of motifs, kind of like the groundwork we've been talking about of Enoch laying for Christianity, which is anyone who denies Christianity's being influenced by Enoch's literature hasn't read Jude, number one, and then isn't paying close enough attention to some of this. So let me just, is that cool with you? Is that all right if I read?
Absolutely.
You give it that? Okay.
Yeah.
The figure of Enoch, long shadowed in the annals of religious history, demands a closer and more discerning look, especially to unravel the depths of Jewish and Christian thought. His significance, often understated, is crucial for a comprehensive understanding of the evolution of Jewish ideology during the Second Temple period. Our conventional perceptions of Enoch in the Bible, largely shaped by subsequent developments in religious canon and scripture, might need serious reevaluation. All right. Going down here just a second. Our last documentary on Enoch casts revealing light on the enigmatic character, drawing striking parallels with the ancient Adapa from Mesopotamia, as we talked about earlier. Adapa, a figure steeped in Mesopotamian mythology, was renowned for his exceptional wisdom, serving as a sage or priest in Ea's temple, Ea being the deity of wisdom and magic. In Eridu, one of ancient Mesopotamia's oldest cities, Adapa embodies the archetype of wise yet mortal man. In some renditions of the myth, Ea is portrayed as Adapa's father or creator, symbolizing a profound bond between the deity and his enlightened human servant. While Ea endows Adapa with unparalleled wisdom, he does not grant him eternal life. This aspect of the myth accentuates a crucial dichotomy: the divine bestowal of wisdom juxtaposed with the inherent limitations of human mortality. Adapa's narrative, which we already covered some of that, so now we're going down. In performing his duties, Adapa found himself fishing on the Tigris River. A violent storm provoked by a fierce wind overturned his boat. In response, Adapa, in a fit of anger, shattered the wings of the south wind, halting its gust for a week. We've been talking about order, chaos. Yeah. In response, Adapa, in a fit of... Okay, I already said that. This act drew the attention of Anu, the deity who summoned Adapa to explain his actions. However, Ea, another god, provided guidance to Adapa, advising him to win over Dumuzid and Gishzida. So that was I knew Dumuzid was in there, but Gishzida, the celestial gatekeepers, and to abstain from consuming food or drink in the heavens, warning that such substance could be lethal. Adapa donned attire symbolic of grief, conveyed to Dumuzid and Gishzida that their absence had plunged the land into mourning. I guess there's a famine in the earth due to him not having wind, and the cycle of chaos is taking place. In heaven, he was presented with the food of life and the water of life, but he refused them as instructed by Ea. He also accepted garments and oil, using them as advised. When brought before Anu, Adapa explained his refusal to partake in heavenly banquet, attributing his caution to Ea's counsel. Anu, amused by Ea's machinations, rhetorically questioned what harm Adapa had inflicted upon humanity. So he's mocking him like, dude, what did Ea do? But this actually caused problems, and I forgot to mention this earlier, for humanity. He then declared that human beings would endure diseases, though these could be mitigated by the goddess Ninkarak. After this judgment, Adapa was returned to Earth. This myth of Adapa from the Old Babylonian period, 1894 BCE to 1595 BCE, to the Neo-Assyrian version dating around 750 BCE, around the time of some of the prophets, according to the Bible, introduces an exorcistic procedure. It repeats that Adapa went to heaven and saw all its secrets. Though still a human being, he thus gained divine knowledge. Adapa's heavenly knowledge is invoked as a means to cure disease. So they try to heal using... You could see how this could fit into something in Enoch. His wisdom, and Jesus, his wisdom is no ordinary wisdom. It has its source in heaven. We could see how this myth sets up the heavenly or divine mediator myths of Moses and Enoch. Now, this is where I think I went on this interesting trail from here, and to say in ancient shadows of Greek mythology, a tale as old as time itself unfolds, first chronicled by the 8th century BCE bard, Hesiod, in his epic Theogony. Here we meet Prometheus, offspring of Titan Lepidus, and either Clymene or Asia or Oceanid. He stands alongside his brother Meniotis, Atlas, and Epimetheus, and they're crazy names in Greek. So
So
I
crazy.
literally have to prepare when I'm like recording these because
No kidding.
pronouncing is hard. In a lineage of mythic proportions, Hesiod paints Prometheus as a cunning figure, daring to challenge the all-knowing, all-powerful Zeus. The scene is set at Mycenae, a pivotal moment where gods and mortals negotiate their coexistence. Prometheus, master of guile, presents Zeus with a deceptive choice: nourishing beef concealed within an ox's stomach, symbolizing a valuable essence hidden by an unappealing guise, and mere bones, deceptively cloaked in tantalizing fat. Zeus in his so pretty much, to put it in simple terms, he's getting food from the humans, which were created to help serve them food, brings food to Zeus and layers the best stuff with this crappy outline, like, oh, you don't want this one, Zeus, and then the good, or the vice versa. So in this one, it's like, oh, this one's really good, you want this one, but underneath is all the BS, none of the good meat. So Zeus ends up going for it, right? So it says, in choice unknowingly decrees a lasting tradition for sacrificial offerings. Humans would feast on meat, offering only the fat wrapped bones to the divine. This trickery, however, incurs Zeus's wrath, leading him to conceal the secret of fire from mankind. In a daring act of defiance, Prometheus reclaims this elemental power, entrapping it within a fennel stalk to illuminate humanity once more. This rebellion ignites further fury in Zeus, who introduces a beguiling shy maiden, crafted from clay by Hephaestus and adorned by Athena, into the world of men. This maiden, Eve, Pandora, though unnamed by Hesiod, she is the Eve of the scenario because she gets blamed for all that goes wrong with man. This maiden, Pandora, though unnamed by Hesiod, becomes a progenitor of a lineage that brings both delight and despair to mortal men. For his transgressions, Prometheus endures a punishment of eternal torment. Bound in chains, his immortal liver consumed daily by Zeus's sent eagle, only to regenerate each night. It is not until the hero Heracles, sanctioned by Zeus, intervenes, slaying the eagle and liberating Prometheus from his perpetual agony, that this chapter of the mythic history finds its closure. In the Greek myth retold by Hesiod in Works and Days, the story of Prometheus and the stolen fire gets even more interesting. So they keep building on it. Zeus is really upset with Prometheus for tricking him, so he decides to hide not just the fire, but also the basic things people need to live. Hesiod suggests that if Prometheus hadn't made Zeus mad, life would have been super easy for humans, with plenty of food and no need to work hard. Does that not sound like Adam? We can see Adam written all over this.
Right.
In the story, we also learn about gifts, Pandora, which means all gifts. I'm just skipping a little here. Zeus gets a bunch of other gods and goddesses like Athena, Aphrodite, and Hermes to help make Pandora special. But here's the catch. After Prometheus steals fire, Zeus sends Pandora to humans as a kind of punishment. Prometheus' brother Epimetheus ignores a warning and accepts Pandora. She comes with a jar, and when she opens it, all sorts of bad stuff like sorrow and diseases come out. Pandora quickly closes the jar. Remember the earlier Babylonian you screwed it up. Adapa, you brought diseases to humanity. Well, here you have again in this myth where it's now this woman, Pandora, with her jar, opening it up, bringing diseases and sorrow that come out. And of course, it goes on, diseases leading to death, which is clearly something we also see in Genesis with
the garden.
Compared to Eve in Genesis, and you can see the punishment of diseases leading to death, and this as well as the earlier Adapa myth. I just wanted to show you that, and I could go on and like get into some of the other parallels that I found. But in the Greek myth, in the biblical myth, in the earlier Mesopotamian myth, there's overlap, and some scholars think Prometheus, the myth in the Greek myth, actually influenced Enoch in some way. I haven't gone down that rabbit trail extensively, but I plan to, and see what the scholars say on it. So, sorry.
Wow. No, that's so fascinating.
And to do like we've been doing all episode, I can take this in the opposite direction and bring it forward. Because with the book of Enoch and the character of Enoch, the things he does and the things he's expected to do, you see the same stuff popping up in the New Testament. So parallels between Enoch and Jesus, you have both of them receiving revelations while praying specifically to El Elyon, not to Yahweh, not to the Holy Spirit, to El Elyon specifically. They're both receiving visions while standing by a river. They both receive visions of the opening of heaven. They see a spirit from heaven who then, and then they're taken on a tour to see the kingdoms of the world. In their revelatory experiences, they are both passive in the experiences where they are led, made to stand, carried by angels, and transfigured. And then they're active in those visions in their decisions concerning how they move about, which that's like two really specific things going on here when they're active and when they're passive. They both come out and mention a fiery imprisonment for the wicked, which is not a feature of mainstream Judaism at the time. This is something completely separate, and they're in there in Matthew 25:31-46 and 1 Enoch 10:13. They both talk about life after death, which, again, this is not a feature. You went to Sheol in Judaism. You didn't have this other life where you like got to go in heaven and enjoy things. Your afterlife was miserable. They both talk about a divine plan for history that specifically includes a generation of exile immediately followed by a generation of redemption. And one that's really cool is they both deliver wisdom beatitudes that are specifically delivered through second-person point of view. So, like, not only are they talking about the same things, they're even using the same style of language. And these are not things that you're going to find in the Old Testament. These are, antithetical. Many of them are antithetical to the message delivered, in the Torah and other books found in Second Temple literature. But these are prominent features that are at the core of First Enoch. And likewise, they stand at the core of the message. So in the first century CE, either you had authors who were crafting the character of Jesus completely from previous scripture and pop culture references and creating them out of whole cloth, or you had authors adding on to the legend of Jesus and using these things like from First Enoch. But the man himself showed up in first century Galilee talking about things that were already widely known to these people. And when he was delivering his message, he looked around at his audience and said, "Holy shit, I'm surrounded by Christians," because that is what these people were. The followers of First Enoch were, these sectarian Jews were essentially your early Christians. That's why scholars, when they talk about the Essenes, and the Qumran sect, they're like, yeah, they're basically Christians. This is what Christianity came from. So Jesus wasn't talking about anything new. He was talking about things that were already popular and had been popular within these different sects of Judaism for a couple of centuries.
Bingo. Either way you slice it, what's more probable? Either one. I mean, to me, either one's more probable than the magical. Okay. We should be on the same page, and instead there's a lot of quarreling that takes place in the community between, you think there was a guy who was completely mythologized, and maybe we could glean without certainty, but glean potential historical nuggets, or you think the guy was whole cloth invented. Both sides have good reasons, in my opinion, into why they would take those conclusions, but we become internally cannibalizing each other because at the end of the day, we're really not. Both are far more plausible than a guy really walking on water or raising the dead like Asclepius, turning water into wine like Dionysus, or going on a mountain and transfigured, similar to Moses. This is invented. Did Jesus go onto a mountain with a couple guys? Right. Maybe. I wouldn't even say he did. I mean, not in this case. I think that is whole cloth narrative. And
Yeah.
so like we have so much in common, and that's what me and Jason, I think we both have a different like position on that detail. He could be right though. Like he really could. And I think he grants that I could be too.
Yeah.
That's what's interesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was gonna say, like, I absolutely, I agree. Like, I could be totally wrong about whether or not the man existed or not.
Right.
But my opinion is, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't.
Because all the bits and pieces needed to get this movement started and to create this mythology, to build this complex Christology and angelology, all the things that are there for early Christianity already existed. It just needed people to push them in the right direction. Now, was that one guy? Well, probably not. It was probably a bunch of people. Now, did one guy get martyred for it and they latched onto him as a folk hero? That absolutely could have happened because at this point in time, the Romans were killing a lot of Jews. There was a century where that's pretty much all they were doing. A lot of them were martyred. A lot of them were named Jesus. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if there was a guy.
That was the worst time to
we
laugh.
have the building blocks to make the thing. And those building blocks obviously came together. And in my opinion, the guy is boring. I mean, was Jesus the real leader, or was it Paul, or was it someone else entirely? You know, it doesn't matter. What matters is that these stories, these rich, complex stories that have their roots all the way back in prehistory. You know, Derek talks about these earliest written accounts. The thing is, these were people trying to explain things about the world around them, and they go back even before then. They go back to a time before writing existed, before people were even settled in cities. References to ideas that are foundational to early religion can be seen, you know, in the oldest monuments people built, even before the time of agriculture. We're talking, you know, over 10,000 years ago, we're already seeing religion and people are grappling with these concepts. And to me, that's the fascinating part, is how these stories grow and change through countless civilizations. I mean, we still have these stories, and these stories in part are older than the pyramids. And thousands of years from now, when the pyramids are dust, we're still going to have versions of these stories. And that's the part that fascinates me. That's the part, in my opinion, that matters, because that's the part that influences our culture, our politics, how we raise our children, how we vote, you know, our stance on all these different political issues is influenced by stories that came out 10,000 years ago and were written down 5,000 years ago and were modified 2,000 years ago and are still playing a part in our lives.
Wow. That is so true. And it is kind of scary and sad to think that things that old, when people didn't really have a concept of very much, is still affecting us today. And
they still think Bigfoot came from Enoch.
Exactly. Exactly. I don't know if my camera is lagging. It looks like it on my end, but hopefully you can hear me okay. Yeah, okay. I just wanted to ask this one question that my mom put up again, but how does the Book of Enoch contribute to beliefs or understanding of eschatology in ancient Jewish or Christian thought? I know you guys were kind of touching on some eschatology things, but...
Do you want me to tackle this first, Jason? And then
Sure, go ahead. So, because if I do it, we're going to be here for another 2 hours.
I'll just put it this way. There's already an ongoing tradition of eschatology, the end coming. You can read books like, let me see if I can see it from here. There is a book, When Prophecy Failed, goes through the in the Old Testament. I hope you can still hear me. Oh, yeah, there it is.
It really starts popping up a lot in like the books of Isaiah and Jeremiah, and just gets worse and worse as it goes on.
Here's an old one that I think is a goodie, but he's dry. I mean, you need a glass of water because this is a box of crackers right here. But it's super, super careful in showing you how there's this ongoing eschatology, apocalyptic too, which sometimes they're different, because sometimes apocalypse are just revelations being revealed. It doesn't mean the end always. Oftentimes they go hand in hand, though. And a lot of these ideas go way back in, like we've been talking about Genesis, right? Well, where's this Enoch material? I think there's Russell Gamirkin's going to try and maybe make a case, try to argue that he thinks it's potential that Enoch came before the Genesis story of the genealogies. The consensus is right now, and this is where I stand right now, is that Genesis is earlier than the Enoch myth in terms of the story we have. But I just say that to say that the ongoing eschatology and apocalypticism you can see in the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Qumran community, or the community of various texts that we have found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, that they are expecting the end, a fiery near end. And there are various forms of that. There's different date settings by seemingly different groups in this literature. It's a whole library of different types of Jews who have their ideas, Judeans, Jews, however you want to call them. And you find in the New Testament, without a doubt, this same motif. Paul is expecting to be alive at the coming of the end that is supposed to be upon them. And this happens all throughout history. And I love James Tabor says, the one thing that all of the apocalyptic eschatological doomsday cults have in common, and that they're right about, is that they're not right about, but they all have in common, they all were wrong. Every single one of them are wrong. They all expected this to happen. And this is about cognitive dissonance, but it goes into other stuff too. But it makes you realize when they were wrong, why didn't the movement just fizzle out? Why didn't it just stop? And that's a study in its own. That psychologically, there's the sunk cost fallacy. That sunk cost fallacy, but you put a lot of investment. Isn't that the right fallacy?
That is the right fallacy. Yeah, okay. You're correct.
Yeah. So there's a lot of people who put 20 years into following some cult leader, and then you expose them and they get caught prostituting with somebody who identifies as they, them, and you never know, right? There's all sorts of stuff that opens on the news, what we hear about with the pastors. And it's like, dude, you were freaking the sheets the whole damn time while you're preaching against the thing that you were. Stop being hypocritical and just come out, right? But these people, right? They find out this happened and they have these values and they go, I've been giving him 10% of my check for 20 years. And then that person comes out and apologizes and they accept him right back and they realize they just fell. Or they say that was a lie altogether. They won't even accept the evidence or whatever their mental, the cognitive dissonance that kicks in to explain away the problems that have arisen. That's what you see all throughout Christianity. You see that in the Qumran sect of Judaism. And it's like they pass on the felled torch to the next generation saying, hey, it didn't come in our time. And then the next generation goes, they were wrong. They calculated it wrong. And Bobby didn't keep the Sabbath the right way. So we're going to tell you it's here and it's now. And here's our teacher of righteousness or whatever. Now you got to keep passing the torch. And they keep doing that. So,
what if when they say, sorry to interrupt, but what if when they say, well, that's a man, that's human. Of course, they're going to fail. We look to Jesus. He's just looking to Jesus, we have to follow his example. Like, can he just be like, I think he's a cult leader in and of himself in a way. Don't you?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that's funny about this is that if you read the Gospels, you go to our earliest Gospels and they talk about how the end of the world is going to happen while you're still alive. The audience, is still alive, And then by the end, they're like, well, no one knows when it's going to happen. Because by the time these later Gospels were written, those people were all dead.
Yeah.
You see that problem in John 21. Yeah. So you have Mark, Matthew, and Luke, the synoptics. You have this Mark being the earliest, where Jesus says that some of you standing here, he's speaking to the disciples. The context is clear. He's talking to his immediate followers in this context. And he's saying, some of you standing here will not taste death. You're not going to
be like Enoch.
You're going to be, you're going to literally survive through and become immortalized. You're going to be.
That's what I was told.
No, go ahead.
No, that's what I was told. Like, that's what I was told.
Yeah,
I'd be
right.
raptured, and yeah.
Then you get this very weird passage in John 21, which most scholars recognize that John 20 ended that gospel. So someone later adds this chapter to 21, making 21 in John chapter 21. And there's the famous, real well-known story. They're fishing, and then Jesus is on the shore, and they end up diving in. I think Peter's nude, diving in to come to Jesus. Like, whoa, hold on, I got to go to my master. Anyway, the beloved lays on his chest, and he says, Peter, do you love me? Of course. Feed my sheep. Do you love me? Of course. Feed my sheep. Do you love me? Damn it, I said, of course. Anyway, you know the story. Then Peter, he tells Peter how he's going to die. And Peter's like, dude, this isn't cool. What about this guy? And it never names the guy. The beloved is never named. But here he is. It's like we can make guesses. It's James, son of Zebedee. It's this person. It's Lazarus. The list goes on and on. Of course, scholars like that I've been interviewing who are writing the hermeneutic on it, they actually think it's purposefully done. This is a literary trope purposely to have you, the viewer, the reader, or whatever, identify with the beloved. In some way, it's to draw you as the reader to become the beloved of Jesus. So I don't know. I don't know the answer. I'm just throwing things at the wall to see what sticks, because that's what really these scholars are trying to do as well. There is no way. The evidence is scant. It is not something to rely your whole life on. Anyway, last thing I'll say is this. What about that guy? Peter says. And then he says, well, what if it be my will that he remain until I come? What is that to you? You know, you follow me. You do what you're commanded. And then it gives this weird note that it says there was this tradition that some of the followers thought that he was not going to die. And then it repeats it again and says, but no, that's not what Jesus said. Jesus said, if it's my will that he remains until I come, meaning it could not be my will that he stays alive until I come. So it's already getting Jesus off of the hook for the earlier statements. Now, did Jesus really say these? We don't know. Right. We don't even know. This could have been put in the mouth of Jesus. Some scholars that are historicists even say Jesus probably didn't say these words. So I'm just trying to make the point that there is already this apocalyptic in the mouth of Jesus, whether he said it or not, that they were not going to die before the end came. And now they're getting off the hook in John 21 and in 2 Peter 3 that Jason brought up. There's mockers and scoffers in the last days. And don't be the brethren. God is patient, long suffering, that more will be saved. And of course, it's talking about cosmology because it brings up the flood and the final destruction with fire where the elements will melt, etc. So it failed. And they're trying to get Jesus off the hook, and now they're making time, not time. Well, what God? It could be 3 days, it could be 3 million years for the Lord. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but you know what happens.
Yeah. See, at least the Persians, they put their grand end of the world like 25,000 years in the future, so they didn't have to worry about it. They didn't say, "Oh, you're not even going to die before it happens." Oh no, they're like. Our religion won't even exist by then. It's all right. They were smart to do it that way.
Just to recognize Kip in the chat and just to say
hello,
that
Dr.
I called him before this because I was going to say, dude, there's so much about Enoch and the textual stuff and the community stuff that I'm not really brushed up on. I need to read more on. I know the
How
mythical.
Are you not brushed up? Oh, okay. Because
you have no clue, Stacy. This is a enigma. There are layers and depth. And here's the thing. Very respectable scholars will look at this and not agree on details. Jason's been studying it way longer than me, and he'll tell you, he's like, man, I was reading this guy, and I don't even know the names. You're like, this guy, and he's thinking this, but then I went to this Enoch lecture scholarly get together, and this guy's saying this, and they don't agree, and like Boccaccini, the guy that I'm reading right now, I know Seth L. Sanders doesn't agree with him. Is that his book?
Oh, that's one of them. This is Enoch and the Synoptic Gospels. It's a whole bunch of different essays by a bunch of different people. Boccaccini and Stukenbrook are the ones who edited this and collected all the essays. Fantastic stuff. Really goes into the parallels between, the story of Enoch and the Synoptic Gospel. I mean, the whole thing. That's what it's about. Yeah, it's very, very good stuff. Like if you want to like a good start to learn about the influence of Enoch and that whole style of thought on the gospel authors in the New Testament, Enoch and the Synoptic Gospels, I would definitely recommend this book. And another thing is there are a lot of garbage copies of Enoch out there.
Okay, that's what I was gonna ask.
99 out of
Where
100 just
read it.
use them to get your table to level out. Okay, that they're not good for much else. But the translation by Nickelsburg and Vanderkam, that is the translation that you want to grab. Nickelsburg also has an amazing commentary on First Enoch. It's 2 parts. The first part is gigantic, and these books are like over $100 a pop. I'm lucky that my listeners bought them for me because I don't know that, like at the time I couldn't justify it in the budget. But I have the 2-part commentary from Nickelsburg that is amazing. Like I said, I think it's about 100 or
more, bro.
Right?
I mean, jeez.
Well,
awesome.
Brosis and Genesis, my listeners crowdfunded that and had it shipped to Russell Gamirkin to get it autographed before it was sent to me. Dude, I look, I know Mythvision has an amazing crowd, but I think I take the prize for having the best followers in the entire podcast universe. Over the course of 1 year, I got over $1,000 worth of books that I didn't even ask for.
Wow.
And that's not a unique year. I get hundreds of dollars worth of books from my listeners annually. They're amazing people.
Well,
so yeah,
you do such a great job. So they want you to continue doing what you're doing.
Yeah, it's a bribe. I know what it is. They don't actually like me. They're just like, incorporate this because I don't want to read it all. But yeah, so want to learn more about Enoch, Nickelsburg and Vanderkam translation, and Enoch and the Synoptic Gospels. Check those 2 out. And also check out the Dragons of Genesis podcast episodes 48 to 54. It's a 7-part series just on First Enoch. All in all, probably about 5 hours long. I go through every chapter. In audio podcast format, I think it is still the most comprehensive coverage of Enoch that does not include Bigfoot or ancient aliens. So definitely go check that out. It's all based on good scholarly material. I did my best, so if there's anything in there that is inaccurate, I worked with what I had at the time. I will be producing updated material in the coming years.
That's awesome. Sorry, I'm looking at the comments. I'm reading your guys' banter back and forth. And sorry, I try not to get distracted, but I'm laughing at the preterist. Yeah, okay. Sorry.
It's sometimes these pre-subs come in the chat and I can't defeat them. They Digital Hammurabi's one of them.
Oh, that guy's the worst.
He's so bad.
He's so wrong about slavery. I mean, we know it was just indentured servitude. Get off your high horse, Josh.
Duh. How dare him? I mean, it's just terrible. I really don't recommend his books, even though many of my documentaries are based off of his books.
Yeah.
I'm a living contradiction. Anyway,
you just do it for the clicks. We know it. It's for the algorithm.
No doubt
about that.
No doubt. And yeah. But yeah, Stacy, you've done absolutely amazing. I really don't. You sat here and listened to us.
Yeah. And she didn't even fall asleep once. Oh my Jeez.
Gosh. It's because I think you guys are so great and I love learning about this stuff. So thank you. Yeah. And
you try to make it fun.
Yeah. David was supposed to be here, but he was not feeling well. So thanks for making this awesome for all of us. So hopefully he'll be back for next week because we have Dr. Kip joining us next week. So
Oh, nice.
yay! I'm excited. So yeah, everyone, you can find Jason at Dragons and Genesis. Your podcast is on YouTube and on other platforms as well, correct?
Yeah, go to get any podcast app. It could be Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spreaker, whatever, and just type Dragons and Genesis and look for the big orange logo with a silhouette of Godzilla attacking Jerusalem. It's very difficult to miss, okay? I am the #1 secular Bible study podcast with Godzilla in the logo.
I love that.
Yeah. If I put enough enough qualifiers in there, then I win by default, which is the best way to win.
Perfect.
So yeah, just search for me that way. My Enoch episodes are episodes 48 to 54. All the titles of those episodes are references to popular songs, so it's easy to find them.
Perfect.
And his voice is soothing, so you can enjoy it.
It's very nice. Yeah, he has very good audio. And then Derek, we can find you at Mythvision podcast on YouTube, right? And
Yep. I've got a couple different Mythvision channels floating around, but yeah, just be ready for the next documentary. I'm trying to take these
so many.
Trying to take these really, like, imagine I said, hey, read When Prophecy Failed by Robert P. Carroll. I guarantee you 99.9% of viewers didn't even buy the book, let alone read it.
Right.
So what I do is I go, all right, I'm going to make a documentary and I'm going to make this book into a documentary and leave some stuff for you to have to want to read the book and buy the book to help the publisher and the scholar get, sales. I do want to help them, but I want to make it where anyone can listen and go, holy crap, you took the book and actually made my life where I travel, I drive trucks. Jason's a trucker. Hey, I can actually listen to this book that I don't know if I'm that into and put it at 2 times speed on YouTube and listen to Derek give me the book in a synopsis form and be educated for free.
That's awesome. Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you guys so much for being here. We just want to give a quick little reminder that we also have other shows here. Oh, okay. First, we're going to do the patrons. So thank Eric Ozols, Rion, D. Murphy, Dandy, Michael Wiseman, Kathy Cotton, Cindy Plaza, Sunny Shell, Aaron Coalson, Phil Calderone, Amanda McLeod, and Logan Fisher. For being our patrons, you can go to patreon.com/skeptichaven if you would like to support us that way. And also don't forget to check out our other shows here. We have Tuesdays, which is today, Secular Soapbox. Thursdays, The Sunny Spot. Saturday, The Global Atheists and Women Atheists Unload. And then we have our call-in show, which is Let's Talk on Sundays. So make sure you are subscribed and hit the bell because we have lots of great content. So, and if you also enjoy listening to me, I have my own little podcast with, well, I don't want to say little, it's growing, but my own podcast with my mom called the Stacy's Mom Podcast. So feel free to subscribe. But thank you both for being here. This was wonderful. And thanks to everyone in the chat. And that is all for tonight. We will see you next time. Bye.